Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil YouTube episode. Today we have Season 5 FAQ number 3. We intend on doing a lot more of these, and as per usual, I'm gonna get right into it. Eric, who works here from Thrive, got the shirt on today. Eric's filming me, so give him a shout out. Here it is. I'm gonna open it up, jump right into the questions, and we'll go. Before I get started, you'll notice I'm wearing a lot of swag. We're starting to add all the family team members to the swag area, so if you wanna buy their gear, support them, support BuildASoil. It's a really fun way to do so. Also, you guys are the first to see this, well, a couple employees, but we just got our first lighters in stock, and they're being added to the website right now. Loyal to the Soil and BuildASoil. Together you got the combo. This is kind of low key, like someone's like, what's that? You're like, oh, it's BuildASoil. Pretty cool. I love it, so I just wanted to share that with you. I'll be adding these to the website today. Let's get started. Greenza says, have you ever tried HST method called mainlining with your living soil? Yes. I haven't mainlined in a long time, and I'll explain it. So for those of you that are listening, HST means high stress training, and I believe that mainlining is more of a low stress training, and I'll explain what I mean by that. However, the amount that you defoliate kind of adds more stress, so it's possible that you could call it HST. I believe it's more LST. What I mean by that is, if you have a container, let's say it's a 20-gallon round container, a lot of people will bend the main branch over, and instead of super cropping, which is high stress where you're pinching it, they'll gently bend it and they'll tie it. And then they'll do this with all parts of the plant. But what they do in mainlining that's different is you create, by topping, multiple tops that you candelabra out to shape in a perfect manner. So you have two going this way, two going this way, the two going that way, and it's literally perfection all the way around. And then once you get it all tied down and the plant starts reaching up all around, and it creates a number of tops that are completely lollipop, so only the new growth at the top of each branch is perfectly arranged, almost like it's an invisible scrog screen, okay? It works really well. But here's what I find troubling to me. It's a lot of planning and it's a lot of veg time, and I think veg time is a waste of your efforts. I would prefer to see you just do a bend here, a bend there, clean up the lowers, and let it rage after 7 to 10 days of veg, maybe 15 to 20 days of veg. But if you're gonna top and bend and top and bend and make the main line and do all of it so it's perfect, I feel like you can spend months vegging a plant to fill a tent perfectly. I'd rather get 2 cycles in the same amount of time instead of 1. You're gonna get more yield in that same calendar year by having more harvests by always being in flower. So I'd rather you see a nice fresh clone transplant, good health and size, transplanted into a big container, vegged for 7 to 10 days and lots of them, and you're basically always in flower. To me, that's the ideal. Next, I prefer to manage a high stress super cropping with a little bit of defoliating, and that's been my go-to style as opposed to topping and really spending the time to mainline, but totally works. It's one of those things that I don't believe is for me, but if it's for you, I feel like the people that like it, they're probably a little bit more left brain, structured, organized, and the beauty of like the geometry of it all is really attractive. But the time that it takes and all of that, I end up just not doing it. So that's my short and long answer on mainlining. Great question. Next one, 2159 says, why do we use peat and cocoa in big living soil beds? We use just peat, not cocoa coir. That's the original living soil recipe, was not cocoa coir. Lots of people add cocoa coir or do exclusively cocoa coir for some environmental concerns, which I feel like are not valid. We can discuss that more later. Either way, we're kind of being hypocritical using peat or cocoa, and so you have to pick your poison, so to speak. So why do we use peat and cocoa in big living soil beds? I mean, after 1 season, it's normally all broken down, especially when adding worms, enzymes, and additional microbes. So after just 1 or 2 seasons, our carefully balanced soil mix, of course still great, but it's just a mix between compost and pumice. Even the rice hulls are all gone. So why not use a balanced, let's say 50-50 mix out of vermicompost and pumice, with rice hulls as mulch for the silicate from the beginning? Means less changes within the mix over the years and more consistent long-term behavior regarding drainage and aeration. Really looking forward to hearing your opinion. Thanks and best wishes from Europe. Great question. In Europe, peat moss is a lot more damaging. The way that they mine it and use it is not nearly as sustainable. They use it for energy source and burning it and all sorts of things. Here in the United States, having North America, having Canada right there, we have a much deeper reserve of peat moss, much shorter freight distance, and very, very well managed. So it's very difficult. They cannot over harvest it. In fact, I believe in the last 100 years, the statistic is like less than 2% of the available reserves have even been mined, even with everything they have going on. So over in Europe, it is more of a concern. But let me start from the beginning. In one season, it's basically all broken down. I don't believe that to be true. It's possible that it is broken down, but when you're using cover crop and you have rock dust and you have the pumice, it creates a texture in place that I believe is better. And that's why I like cover crop. That's why I don't re-amend by mixing it all back together and digging the root system out. That root system, the constant adding of browns and greens to the mulch layer and the pumice allow for it to be perpetually incredible and to forever be good. But more importantly, I would like to start there. I've mixed 50-50 worm castings and pumice and many other variations of. What I've found is that you don't get a good result. And what I mean by that is the chemical profile, regardless of how good the castings are, is significantly too much at 50%. And the texture that it creates is not ideal right away. And so when we use peat moss, it's very acidic and it has a really nice texture to it. And it adds something that really works well in containers. But to that, we can really jack the calcium, which modifies the pH and allows us to have more of a soil recipe that's super high in calcium, like a traditional soil would be. We've messed with leaf mold, lots of stuff. For consistency in production, I've not found a source of leaf mold that will work. For production on our end, peat moss works phenomenally well. From the home user's perspective, I feel like you could probably make worm castings out of something fairly inert, like paper shreds, cocoa core, something like that, and then use that to mix 50-50 to make a pretty good soil recipe. But what happens when I'm not able to load it up with calcium and when I'm not able to balance it, I'm not able to make a soil recipe that works as well. It is what it is. At the end of the day, our primary focus is quality. And second to that, we don't want to give up on our ethics, but we can't throw away the quality to just do something that might make a little more sense from sustainability, because then it's not sustainable because we throw it away every time and we don't keep it. So use that for what it's worth. I really do feel like there's probably a way that will work better in the future, and I'd love to be able to find it and not use peat moss, but I've tried so many things and it's not worked nearly as well. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna keep the peat moss in there, and I think that you should too. If you're using cocoa core, it's not quite as acidic, and so loading the calcium might be slightly harder, but it still seems to work. We've had our same exact recipes mixed with cocoa core instead of peat moss, and although the CEC is slightly lower and it doesn't perform quite as well, I've had people say that they love it and it works really well for them. And so I would encourage you to try those things, but I've not been able to find a ratio without the peat moss or the cocoa that makes a really spectacular soil. And so although I feel like you're asking from the right place, my experience has shown me that it doesn't work as well, and quality is the most important to us. So I hope that answers your question. Booterson. Hi Jeremy, what are your thoughts on giving my plants the water from my fish tank? I do weekly water changes in the fish tank where I replace about 20% of the tank's water. I normally just give the water to some ornamental plants in my garden, but I'm wondering if it would be a good idea to add to my 30-gallon no-till pots. And if so, at what stages of growth would be best to add it? Thanks. The tank has fish, some shrimp, and live plants in it, and it is filled with RO water. I feel like it'd be totally safe. I don't see why not. Like, it can sustain life, the fish are happy, everything's good, it's probably great. When I first started reading about compost tea, they were using like the air pump with a little air stone until they realized that that wasn't good enough. But the people that would produce good results with that would often use like lake water or something that already had biologically activeness to it. And that was like a hack. And so I feel like using rainwater, using fish tank water, all really good ideas. My only hesitance to tell everybody to use it is I don't know what they're feeding their fish. I don't know the ingredients in the fish food and what that might be adding. I don't feel like it would cause problems, but I'm not sure if it's like the best thing to use. And so you're gonna have to ask yourself what you feed the fish, if you'd be willing to put that in your own garden. And I would be confident that if the fish can live in it, it's perfectly good for living soil, right? I mean, when you're in a fish tank, you're really trying to monitor all these things and make sure the dissolved oxygen level is good and the pH is good and the nitrates are good, all these things. So it definitely should not hurt your living soil. Like I said, my only hesitation is, what are you feeding the fish? Is it something you'd feel comfortable giving to your plants or not? And if it is, heck, do it. If not, then there's your answer right there. Okay, good question, I really like that. In fact, the other day I saw an aquarium with, I'm not gonna remember the name. It was a tree, but anyways, a tree literally growing out of the water in the fish tank, because it was the type of tree that's submerged in water. It was beautiful in someone's house. But from your own fish tank, like if you know what you feed them, sounds good to me. Okay, next question, Grin Robert says, I have a question. Why do you always have your lights up so far up? Because some lower them a little and darken them to save electricity. Yes, and a lot of times I will do that. But what'll happen is we need to go in there and the lights will be here. My face is here and the lighting doesn't look good on camera. And so a couple of things that I don't do at home that I do here. If I can, I do like to have the lights up higher, but it's not the best use for electricity. But sometimes I have them higher so I can crank it higher so that I get the warmth out of it because it's winter and I don't want to add a heater and I like it to be bright. So that's maybe not the most efficient use, but it's a good way to play with that. But here at BuildASoil, I run my lights during the day. I would never do that at home. It's not as energy efficient, both because you can be on off-peak billing cheaper per watt, per kilowatt when you're at night, especially like in cities and other places where they want you to be not during the peak hours using lots of electricity. The other thing is that, you know, at night it's cooler, so now your light's heat doesn't matter as much, so you can have them on low and have them really close to the plants. But for me here, I need to be able to get into the tent during the business day, so I have to run them during the day, and I want to show customers when they come in that we actually walk the walk. We don't just talk the talk. To me, that's really big. To me, that's like anybody can watch videos on jiu-jitsu and probably teach me something, but when we grapple, I'll know and they'll know that they haven't put in the work. And so when I teach, I want to do it. And so we have the lights on during the day, and we also have the lights a little higher so that the lighting looks good in there when I go in and it's easier and I don't have to adjust everything all the time. So that's really the answer. And then third to that is sometimes I like them up high to produce the heat. And so you're going to have to look at your own weakest link and come up with your own decision. But in the 4x4 with the autoflowers, I lowered the light and dimmed it so that I didn't have too much heat, but the plant still got a good amount of light. So you can play with those as tricks. Really good question. Very glad that you asked that, Grin Robert. Okay, Jones. Jones says, I know giving your plants an ice water flush at the end is bro science, but what if you had an earth box and continuously gave it cold water from the fridge to the roots? Would it make a difference? I think what we're talking about is plant steering in a loose way, meaning we want to add stress to the plant in ways that don't harm the plant, because that stress makes the plants harder, produce more of what they're supposed to produce. To me, this is like, you've heard of all the health benefits of guys taking cold plunges, the Wim Hof method, all of that. It's because we're putting our body through stress, and that adapts and makes it stronger. But we're doing it in a good way, a eustress, a positive stress. And so we don't want to release like russet mites to stress them out or to like run a rod through the stalk. I think that's too much stress. But little drybacks, little bits of cold water, I think makes sense to me. But I wouldn't go too far and like refrigerating and using bottles and adding cold water in there, because at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to make a dramatic difference. But I do believe in biomimicry, and I believe nature has pretty cold water, not warm water. And so although when I have young plants and veg, I like to give them not ice cold water for the biology, when they're later in flower, typically that would be later in the fall time, and there'd be ice cold rain coming down. Well, 50, 60 degrees, like depending on where you live, the water would be pretty cold. So to me, it makes sense, but I don't know if it's totally necessary. And that small amount of stress from the cold water could be of huge benefit. It may not matter. I totally encourage you to try. It may not be something that I try here just because the fridge and the setup and how I'd have to do it. But I will say it may not be total bro science. Like, there's something about following the cycle of nature and how it works. It's warmer in the beginning, it's colder at the end. There's a little more rainfall at the end, right? But I don't want mold. So controlling it in the earth box does make some sense to me. And I encourage you to try it. Like, tell me what you think. So really good question. I love these FAQs. Stangman says, I love this Thrive. Haha, yeah. Wearing the shirt, and my plants are very happy. I have a question. My H2O is at 8.0 pH, and when I add 1.5 ounces to a gallon of water, it goes down to 5.2 pH. Will the soil buffer it out? Should I be concerned? The soil is totally going to buffer it. And what I mean by that is the acidity that you're getting is coming from the ferment that locks in at a very low pH. And what we're adding in there is just affecting the hydrogen in the water. It's not like we're adding tons of sodium and all these alkalinity that's going to permanently fix that pH. And so rainwater is normally in that acidic range, and I think it makes a big difference. So I think you'd be totally fine with adding that in there. Now, I will say, that's why we only recommend the 1 ounce per gallon, maybe 1 to 2 at the most. And I wouldn't be overdoing it because it will make it fairly acidic. And on a young plant, in say BuildASoil Light, that might have a lower pH to start, and overloading it, like we don't want, like less is more, okay? And so what you're telling me from 8 to that 5.0 pH, I also feel like maybe there's a little bit of bicarbonate in your water, and the acid that's in the Thrive is neutralizing that and kind of fixing it for you. And that might be of great benefit. So I don't see a problem with that. Mickey says, love the content and I have a question for you. I've been using the 3.0 in 15 gallons and on the 4th run now. I've been using the Big 6, but my plants are showing boron deficiencies. Any thoughts, products you recommend or advice would be a big help. Thanks for all you do for our community. Interesting. After 4 cycles, you might want to send it off to the lab and just see. The reason I say that is boron is one of the highest ingredients in the big six. So there's lots of boron in there. In fact, if you were to try and correct like a zinc deficiency by adding lots and lots of big six, you might actually be getting more boron than is called for. So I feel like the boron's in there, but I'm not saying that it's not true what you're seeing. So first question I have is, how did you diagnose that you're seeing boron deficiency? And one of the things I would look to, if you really want to geek out, is you can look at the Blue Gold products and buy just their boron product. You can do foliar sprays with it, you can do sap testing, you can geek out on this. But overall, I would say maybe just try adding some boron if you really believe that's it and see if it makes a difference. A soil test would also tell you. Otherwise, really, really good question. When people say they notice a deficiency, my first question is, how do you know? Because sometimes when it's intertwined, there may be something else going on there. And so I really want to be confident that that's what's going on. And a soil test will tell you what's in there. And if it's not in there, the plant can't get it. So that would make sense. The other thing I've noticed in these high organic matter potting soils, micronutrients, it's better to add them more repeatedly than it is to try and maximize them in there, because it seems to be hard and complex to get it out of that organic matter on demand, like as if we're building agronomic soil out there on an acre. So something to be thoughtful, something to be mindful of. Really good question. I wish I had a better answer, but I try and do my best to be honest with my answers. And if I don't know, I don't know. But that's the direction I would head down. Dr. Kayak, last question on here. Dr. Kayak, how about a yes or no answer? Do trichomes ripen more after you chop? Yes. I have to elaborate, I can't leave it. So trichome, I believe, is sort of a living thing, right? So if you leave weed out for like a year or get oxidized, it's gonna be amber as f***. Like the whole thing is gonna be amber, it's gonna degrade. And so I wouldn't call it ripening in that point. Once you've harvested, it's almost like it's going to oxidize, and that's going to change. And so part of why we don't harvest with all amber is it doesn't get better with age. And so it's only gonna amber more. And so I prefer to have very small amounts of amber. That way during the long, slow drying and curing process, it fully ripens, so to speak. But to think that flipping it on 24 hours of light or stressing it for one day is gonna create additional new trichomes that take 30 to 45 days to develop doesn't make sense to me. However, taking what's existing there and maybe ripening it just a little more does make sense. I think that happens naturally through the drying and curing process. And that's why the BuildASoil way is harvesting when there's not as much amber. For my preference, you do what you want, and then doing that 2-week minimum dry time that really allows it to kind of turn into something special. When I first started growing, I always thought that once I'm done drying, curing it for like 6 months or at least a month or something was gonna turn it into double the strength magic herb that was better than anything you could buy because nobody knew how to cure. And then I realized curing was what they say messes up a shitty dry. And when you slow dry, it's curing at the same time. And by the time you lock it in that jar, it should be the best it's going to be. I like fresh herb. However, certain genetics will definitely change in profile over a month of cure, or let's say a couple weeks to maybe a couple months. And so I encourage you to play with that on your own and see what you like best. I continually go back to preferring fresh herb and how it tastes and smells and everything better than the older herb. And that's part of why I love indoor. Although I love outdoor, it's my absolute favorite. 11 months after I've harvested, I'm kind of like, yo, give me some freshies. You know, I'd love to have a more recent harvest. And so that's why I do both. Great FAQ. Thank you for everyone for loading these questions up. We promise to do more. And as always, like, subscribe, tell your friends about this. If they've got questions, you don't have to answer. Refer them to the FAQ. Help your buddies out. They'll get better product. You'll be able to share with them, and it just keeps this whole thing going. Thanks again as always, and until next time, I'll see you on the next BuildASoil FAQ video.